then burned it off as a gas carrying the excess heat with it. Obviously, if you miscalculated how much heat shield you would need, your craft would run out and you'd burn up. Redundancies would need to be built into the rocket in the event of a malfunction, while the "was a human on board a rocket-powered escape vehicle" was built into the spacecraft as a kind of ejector seat. The whole process had to be thoroughly tested before they could try out. A manned mission. The first effort in August 1959 did not go well due to an incorrectly installed power plug. The first Mercury Redstone rocket, known as Little Joe, only got about 4 in off the ground before dropping back down on the landing pad. Future launches had mixed results. Von Braun ran 20 tests in all between 1959 and 1961. Most of these tests were not crewed, except for a few where trained monkeys and chimpanzees occupied the pod. Von Braun wanted to be absolutely sure of success before allowing a human to go up in one of his rockets. While his caution was excellent scientific practice, it came at a price. In April 1961, Russia beat America to the punch by successfully launching astronaut Yuri Gagarin into orbit, making him the first man in space. Von Braun's first human launch came 1 month later with astronaut Alan Shepard. Although this was still only a suborbital flight, 2N for the Russians, they got the first satellite into space and now the first human into orbit. And the U.S. was worried. Project Mercury ended up launching 6 human flights, 2 on Redstone Rock Row ETS and 4 on Atlas rockets, all of which were successful. And although they didn't get into space soonest, as had been their goal, they learned incredibly important things about launching rockets, enduring space, and surviving re-entry. However, when NASA announced the Apollo program in 1960, with its intention to reach the moon, it became clear that far more knowledge would be needed. Mercury had seen its final mission put an astronaut in space for a day and a half, but trip to the moon and back would take 8 days. Also, NASA decided the best way to get to the moon would be to use the lunar orbit rendezvous method. The plan required them to perform perhaps the most difficult maneuver in space travel, docking with another object in orbit. They hadn't even achieved this around Earth yet, let alone the moon. The lunar orbit rendezvous method consisted of a lunar module detaching from a command and service module landing on the moon, then meeting back up with the command and service module, which would then take all the astronauts back to Earth. Astronauts would also need to practice doing spacewalks in case work on the outside of a spacecraft became necessary during transit. And finally, more practice would be needed with re-entry techniques, particularly touching down at a pre-selected location on land. Although in the Apollo missions, this last idea was dropped. On top of that, the Soviet Union was ahead, and America needed to catch up. So while the Apollo team set to work developing its rockets and modules, these extra challenges were handed off to a support mission to work out. The mission was given the name Project Gemini. Project Gemini, which launched 12 missions between 1961 and 1966, built on the foundations of Project Mercury. The Gemini capsule was essentially a larger version of the one used on Mercury, now able to hold a crew of 2. The rocket used was a Titan II, another adapted military missile redesigned for a new purpose of discovery. Gemini also saw an expansion on that technology for Project Mercury. The Mercury spacecraft could do little to redirect itself once it made it into orbit. If a space rendezvous was going to happen, this would need to change. The Gemini spacecraft was given an orbit attitude and maneuvering system to allow it to change its orbit and orient. While in space, the Gemini spacecraft was also developed to be able to support a crew in space for longer. By the launch of Gemini 5, astronauts were able to spend an entire week in space to play it safe in later flights. This time was extended to 14 days by Gemini 7. 6 more days than would be required for a trip to the moon. While there was a lot of success with these missions, there were some scares too. Neil Armstrong flew on Gemini 8. The purpose of this mission was to meet up with and dock with an uncrewed Agena target vehicle, which had been launched earlier. The first part of the mission went smoothly, with the docking being a success. But while Armstrong and his co-pilot David Scott were still in the target vehicle, they noticed that the ship had started spinning in space. This could be catastrophic. If the spinning ship hit their Gemini ship while the two attempted to undock, it could cause fatal damage to their craft. Furthermore, they were not exactly sure why the craft was spinning if a thruster was firing when it shouldn't be. Then it would be using up valuable fuel. Fuel that was needed to orient themselves for the correct way for re-entry if they were not facing the right way. The heat shield would not protect them from the incredible heat generated. The two astronauts worked quickly, and by firing one of the opposing thrusters, they were able to slow the two crafts enough that they were able to get back into the Gemini craft and just about undock safely. They realized then that it had been one of the Gemini craft thrusters that had been firing. Both astronauts were close to passing out. However, they managed to fix the fault and using the re-entry thrusters. Armstrong calmly got the craft back under control. Stopping his tumble, he managed it with only 30% fuel. Music remaining.